There's a great question that people ask, and it's fundamental. They should ask it, and it's like, well, what about injustice? Aren't we supposed to be angry about injustice? It's a great question. Aren't we supposed to be? And my answer is, biblically, no. What we're supposed to do is actually do something about it. I think it's true, and I'm not the first person to believe this, by the way, in case you're like, that's nuts. I frequently cite two guys, but there's a lot more people than this, but one is Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who was a man who said, Jesus doesn't make a delineation between righteous and unrighteous anger. There's no such thing as righteous anger for humans in Jesus' vocabulary. We're always supposed to let it go, and we're supposed to forgive even our enemies. And he's a guy who actually tried to kill Hitler. And he was involved in one of the conspiracies to assassinate Hitler, not out of anger, but because he thought that this was the right thing to do. Martin Luther King Jr. is another classic example. Did not believe that he had the right to anger. Even when his house was firebombed and his family was thusly attacked, I mean, he could have lost his family. And after that attack, he even said, I don't have the right to anger, I have to forgive. And what's amazing about his tactical mind, if you study him much, like the decisions he was making were very clear-headed and brilliant. And people will bring up like letters from a Birmingham jail. If you read that, it's very pointed. I mean, it is on point. He makes his case very vividly to his white brothers and sisters who he feels let down by. But it's not angry. It's very clear-headed. And it's also headed towards reconciliation is what he's trying to do with these people who have wronged him. He rejected the idea of righteous anger, and he stood up against injustice. We can do this in our lives. In fact, think about this. If we need anger to do justice, who are the people charged in our culture with like the justice system? Do you want police angry? We've seen where that goes. It's horrible. Do you want judges angry? No, we want them clear-minded, actually doing the right thing, protecting the innocent, and working out justice without anger. You're better off without it. Whatever you can do with anger, Dallas Willard said, I quote him a lot, because he also believed this as well. But he said, whatever you do with anger, you can do better without it. The weird thing is, though, because we call it righteous anger, because we decided my anger's righteous. My anger's always righteous to me, right? I'm never like, I'm angry and I'm wrong. No, we always think, everybody thinks their anger is righteous. So you pat yourself on the back for it because it's righteous, right? So the angrier I get, that must be I'm really righteous because I'm really angry. Like our culture has made this error. It doesn't fix anything. But action actually does. The problem is they've even done studies on Twitter, for instance, which anger, by the way, travels so fast on Twitter. They've proven that you can write something inspiring and beautiful and profound. You know, one person clicks like as a pity like on there. You do something angry and bam, retweets, it's off. You affirm somebody else's sense of righteous anger, then it travels around the world quickly. Anger travels on social media. Beauty doesn't. That's too bad. But that's how we humans operate. And they have shown, I find this fascinating, they've actually shown with studies that they've done that the people who tweet the most about whatever issue are less likely to give to that issue. I find that fascinating, but it also kind of makes sense because if you think me expressing my outrage is actually me doing something about it, then you did something. I did it, I tweeted. I took a stand, I tweeted about it. I'm not saying don't tweet about things or don't Facebook about what, that's up to you. What I am saying is don't conflate that with actually taking action and making a sacrificial stand for something. That's where the beauty is. It's not anger. Anger will cloud your judgment. Anger solves nothing. I'll give you an example of how you can do things like a parking spot. For instance, let's say somebody takes your parking spot, it's yours. You don't have to let them have the parking spot. You can tell them, you're in my parking spot, you're gonna need to leave. You can do it without anger. You can actually do the right thing without anger. It doesn't mean you have to roll over. Anybody can do whatever they want. They can take your spot. They can take your car. They can drive off with it. Like, that's not it. That's not what I'm talking about. But the fact is, like Willard said, whatever you do with anger, you could do better without it. And what's fascinating about this, so I've been trying to practice this unoffendable thing, and it is a practice. You actually can get better at this because you're constantly reminding yourself to forgive people. So that's just it becomes a lifestyle of forgiveness and letting go of anger. It doesn't mean you get run over. So after I wrote this book, my wife, when we lived in the city, my wife was out walking our dog at 8:30 in the morning, and a dude comes out of nowhere and this is so random and bizarre. The young guy comes running down the street with a hammer and throws it at her head. Yes, my wife, it was so weird. So she ducks, she doesn't know what to do. She's like, you don't know what to do. You don't expect, I'm probably going to throw a hammer at my head here. It's about 8:30. She didn't know what to do, so she like struggles to pick up this hammer. It's on the street, and the guy comes running at her, grabs her, puts her in a headlock, and starts throwing her around and throws her on the street. And she's screaming, help me, and the guy runs off. And the wild thing about this was we reported it to the police instantly. They didn't arrest the guy. And so he would walk by our window. We were right on the street where we lived. We would see him. She'd be knitting, and that same guy would come walking right by our window, like 3 feet away from her, sitting on the couch every day. And so I would call the police again. I called the mayor. I'm like, hey, this guy needs to be arrested. Nothing's happened. I followed the guy back to his house and called 911. I know where the guy lives. He's right there. I'm looking at him. Like, come get the guy. They didn't do anything. So we lived in an area called Midtown, which was having a crime wave at the time. And they'd had some serious stuff going on, like murders and whatnot. And I thought, somebody's got to do something. So I put on a nice looking sport coat and I drove downtown. I told my wife before I left, like I'm going down to the mayor's office or somewhere, and I'm not leaving until they arrest this guy. Because this isn't fair for you to be terrorized like this. And she's very level-headed, but it was just like, this is so weird that he's still out on the street at any time, could run into him. So I go down, true story, I go downtown. I don't know where the mayor's office is. I was asking people, I was going in buildings like, is this a city building? Can you point me to the right one? They have different government buildings or whatever. This is in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. And I walk into this building, that building. I walk into a building, and I'm not making this up. I walk in behind a press conference in a lobby about crime in Midtown. And up front, the police chief and the mayor are up front, and like the lead inspector guy, and they're saying, we need citizens to get involved to stop crime in Midtown. And they were just finishing up. I walked in behind it. I had my nice sport coat on and everything. I'm like, wow, this is amazing. They're like, any other questions? I was like, I got a question. And so they're like, okay. And they actually picked me like I was a reporter. Like they didn't notice I just walked in the door. And I was like, okay, yeah, I have a question. I'd like to know, you're soliciting help from the police, from people in the neighborhood. I live in Midtown. Why don't you arrest the guy that attacked my wife? And all the TV cameras just swing. And they're like, well, we'd rather not talk about that now. And I said, I would like to talk about it now, and we're going to talk about it now, because I tried to contact you privately and you didn't respond. And I've given you multiple opportunities. Well, we just don't think this is a press matter. It is now, because I'm going to protect my wife. And I was interviewed on all these stations. I was like the lead story for like 3 days. And you can actually watch this. If you look, I think it's on YouTube even now. It's like, the headline in the paper was Area Man Crashes Press Conference. But what was funny about it, people watch the video and they're like, dude, somebody attacked your wife, but you were cool under pressure. That's not me. That's not me generally. But I wasn't angry. I just wasn't leaving. So I was able to think on my feet. I wasn't clouded by it. So the things I said, they were like, that was hilarious, because they were like trying not to talk to you. You're like, no, we're going to talk right now. This is going to happen. You say you want help with crime. I've handed you all the information. I called 911. I know his name. I gave you an address. You still didn't arrest him. So now you're going to do it. But it's not out of anger. And in fact, when the guy was arrested 2 hours later, when the guy was arrested, it was our hope, and what we lobbied for was mental health counseling, and he had a residential program, and because he's a young guy, we're like, something's not right. We're praying for him. We want God's blessings on him. It's not anger. It's not anger. It's love. It's love that motivates us to do the right things. But if you think your anger is righteous, not only are you suffering physiologically, like we were just talking about, but you can delude yourself into thinking you've done something just by getting angry about it. We need to deal with injustice. You know, there's a woman named Rachel Denhollander who was a gymnast for, maybe you know who she is, but she was a gymnast for Michigan State when Larry Nassar was there. She was one of his victims of abuse. And I thought it was so interesting and so vivid what she said when she was a part of his prosecution. Now, she's somebody who's a believer in Jesus. I have her comments right here on my phone. And she talked about justice and forgiveness. And here's what she said. Both of those are biblical concepts. Both of those represent Christ. We do not do well when we focus on only one of them. What it means when I say that, I forgive Larry Nassar, is I trust in God's justice. And I release bitterness and anger and a desire for personal vengeance. It does not mean that I minimize or mitigate or excuse what he has done. It does not mean that I pursue justice on earth any less zealously. It simply means that I release personal vengeance against him, and I trust God's justice, whether he chooses to mete that out purely eternally or both in heaven and on earth. They work together. God's forgiveness is a beautiful thing. But see, Rachel Denhollander doesn't have to live with that bitterness. She doesn't have to pay this price over and over and over for the rest of her life because she's able to let it go. I use an example because people always will bring up, well, what about this? What about that horrible thing? Are you telling me I should forgive this or that? Like, I can only share the scriptures, which are very pointed about forgiveness and very direct. But I share a story in the book Unoffendable about Sakrixa Him. This guy was in Cambodia in 1977. This is so horrible, it's almost hard for me to talk about, but it's the extremity that makes the point. I think he had 11 people in his family. So the communists in Cambodia were coming through villages and just killing people. They lined his family up against a hole that they had dug and beat them to death. And they all just fell into the hole, including him, but he wasn't dead. So he was lying in this hole overnight with his now deceased family. He crawls out into the dark of night and escapes and manages to get to a city and dedicates his life to vengeance. He remembered vividly what these guys looked like. He remembered the names that they called each other. And he wrote about this in a book because after he became a believer, he struggled with, well, what am I supposed to do now? Like, what am I supposed to do? And he came to the conclusion, shockingly, I'm supposed to forgive him. And so he hunted them down. People were scared because he was getting names and addresses and whatnot. They're like, okay, he's going to do something. His whole thing was to go to them and personally tell them, and he did to two of the guys he found, that I forgive you because of what Jesus has done for me. I use that as an example. What happened to his family is unjust. It's horrific. It's unthinkable. It's awful. But he grasped the weight of God's grace towards us, like what Jesus went through for us. And so Sakrixa Him is saying, I don't have a choice. I don't think there is a choice. If I'm somebody who's a Jesus follower, I don't think there's a rationalization for me to think that I can stay angry at somebody else even though I'm a sinner and God has forgiven me. This is radical stuff. I mean, most people don't want to go this far, but since when has Christianity stopped being radical? This is the whole thing. Like I said, this is discipleship itself. Like, this is it. This is amazing grace to be able to do something like that. The world is broken, but we are agents of forgiveness, even as we stand for justice. So that's my response to that question. It's a great question. Like, what do we do? It is a great question. And the beautiful answer is that we can still be free of anger. It doesn't have to kill us. And what we're going to talk about next is just how wonderful that is, how it allows you to see people differently when you do this, when you let go of this judgment towards everybody, like it changes everything. And it's a beautiful thing because you'll see stuff other people won't see, but we're going to talk about that next. So thank you for sticking around.
I also have the ability, what in the world? I'm not good with directions. I don't know where I am. The only map I...
Hey, I could have stayed up here and watched it. Good lesson. So let's discuss some of what we watched here. I've got some questions I can I can ask you here. Injustice is a concept that can be difficult to pin down because people have different opinions of what is right and what is wrong, or appropriate or inappropriate. In your mind, what are some clear-cut examples of injustice in our world? Some clear-cut examples of injustice in our world. Anybody? Because people have different concepts of what's right and what's wrong, right? What's appropriate and inappropriate. But in your mind, what are some clear-cut examples of injustice in our world?
Well, people are picking on Jewish people again.
Okay? Anti-Semitic violence and stuff like that, that's happening. You think of abortion. I mean, these babies are innocent. That's injustice. And how should we handle that? What are some clear-cut examples of injustice? Let's get this conversation going. Huh? Okay, that's an injustice. Mm-hmm. Huh? Scamming people? Boy, that happens a lot, doesn't it? All the time, people are their wheels are turning inside their brains, trying to figure out how to rip the next person off. In fact, we've had some families. Well, Betty knows the Padilla family, they're in Rantoul, and sadly they had got ripped off. Somebody with a phone call pretended like their grandson was in a prison, in jail or whatever, and they needed money to get him out, and they got some money. At the end of it, they got over $100,000 from this elderly couple, and they lost everything that they had. They knew everything about the grandson. Yeah, I mean.
He was over in France.
Yeah.
And he was a cartoonist, an artist that was over there in Newmont. They couldn't imagine why he would be in jail for anything. But when they talked to the person that was portraying him on the phone, he was able to convince them that he was their grandson.
Yep. That clear-cut case of injustice, right? What are some other examples? Human trafficking. And you know what? That happens more than what we realize, even in Illinois. We think of some other states that might be, high trafficking of women or whatever, but that happens a lot. That's an injustice. How about some other things? One thing that I think of injustice. I think if I was a girl in high school and I had to go into the locker room and have a biological male in there that identified as a female and would have to undress in front of that male. And the injustice is the fact that the guy who identifies himself as a female has more rights to be in there than the girls that are in there that you know, they shouldn't have to see this. I think that's an injustice. Yes, Linda.
Price gouging, people just charge ridiculously high prices for their own gain.
And I'm sure that happens a lot, more than what we realize. So it happens, right? I mean, it's all over the place. Contrary to popular opinion, anger does nothing to address injustice. So when have you seen injustice addressed in a way that produced a solution or a resolution? Not through anger, okay? Because anger, it does nothing to address the injustice. And I think we've seen that. You know, you can have, he talked about righteous indignation, right? Like, I have a right to be angry. And I've seen that. We've seen that in people that identify as Christians, that they see this injustice at these abortion clinics, right? So they get all filled up with anger. And what do they do to try to solve the problem? They go out and firebomb the place. That's what anger does, okay? And that's an injustice. So anger doesn't solve anything. And the thing is, when that's done in the name of Christ, then you have others who are not Christians looking at Christians like, you guys are a bunch of crazy, right-wing fanatics. But you can address injustice in reasonable ways, in a way that does produce a solution or a resolution. Can you think of any? Betty.
I had an experience with a very close, good friend. We have known each other over 30 years, and we had different ideas of what was happening in COVID. And I don't believe in anything else. I don't believe in getting the COVID vaccine. That was my personal idea. She was on the opposite end of the spectrum, and towards the end of it, we hadn't seen each other for a couple of years, so we did meet. I asked her, because I knew how she felt, I said, I know you probably don't want to go to a restaurant, but I can go by and, order and pick it up for us, and we can go to the park, because it was nice. So I went to the park, and we had a wonderful visit. We hadn't seen each other in 3 years, and it was great until, and I forgot exactly what brought it up, but the politics came out. And she looked at me and she said, well, if you all would just get the vaccinations, we wouldn't have the problems we have with COVID. And she knew how I felt, but instead of being offended, I looked at her and I said, you know what? The difference between me and you is you're letting this make decisions on how you feel about me now. But I love you so much that I'm going to tell you right now that I'm going to leave. I'm going to forgive you for what you said to me. And I'm going to love you as I always have. And I had that one left. And she sent me a long text telling me how sorry she was. She can't believe she did that. But that's what happens when you get such strong, different ideas and opinions about things. If you don't watch it, it's going to loop you in and drag you down. It almost did. I had to sit there for a second and think, this is my friend.
Yeah.
I love you. I'm not going there.
There's a lot of things that can offend us, is there not? We can be done wrong. I mean, who in here hasn't been done wrong by somebody or have been taken advantage of? You know, I know I shared with my Sunday school class before where, You know, there was a friend of the family that was real close to my son, and have known him for years. And he kind of dropped off the scene, but he ended up getting married, and they had a child, and a lot of time had gone by, and he called me. He called me Big Steve, you know, hey, Big Steve, because Stevie and me. And he wanted to know if he could come by and talk to me. I thought it was kind of unusual. Well, he was between a rock and a hard place. He worked in Chicago. He had a baby, a new wife, and he had a motorcycle. And there's just no way he could take his wife to doctor's appointments. How are you going to do that, you know, a new wife and your baby on a motorcycle? He was wanting to try to get a new car, and but he didn't have, his finances were really bad. I want to know if he could borrow money from me. And I said, yeah. And so I loaned him some money, but it wasn't enough for him. He couldn't even get a loan because his credit was so poor. And so I gave him money, and then I said, why don't you get a loan at my bank, and I'll co-sign for you, which I did. And he made a few payments, you know, not what actually the payments were, but he was paying me. Just, I didn't want to get back in the hole that he was in. And, but then, you know, things started getting really bad. And, you know, excuses coming up. He couldn't make the payment, couldn't make the payment. And so what am I to do? Now, I'm being taken advantage of, okay? So what are my options? My options are to get mad, call him up, demand the payment to be made, and he can go find somebody else to sponge off of. Well, no. If I want to be a testimony for him to see Christ, and I didn't tell him about this, he found out later on, he couldn't believe, you know, but so I thought, you know, he's having problems. He's having financial difficulties. So I called the bank and I told him, I said, just take money out of my account and pay that loan off for him. So I paid it. You know, I didn't lose any sleep over it. But so why do you think he was extremely embarrassed. I mean, he still didn't contact me, you know, but he felt bad. I said, don't feel bad. I said, you know, here you came to me wanting help. I helped you, and then you had more trouble, and then when I helped you then you kind of shut me off. He goes, well, I just didn't feel like I could even face you. I said, listen, it's okay. You know, we all go, you know, I have been there. I've done that. I've been, you know, you can ask my wife. We have been in financial straits where, like, what are you going to do? But so I could have gotten angry, but I didn't. And the reason I'm telling you this, because you guys aren't talking very much. Somebody's got to, right? So there are injustices, and they can be resolved without anger. And what we do, we get angry. We think that's going to solve a problem, but it doesn't solve a problem. There's ways to solve the issue with abortion by not going and bombing the place, right? There's things that we can do without taking that route. So one of the key points from this week's teaching is that anger clouds our judgment when we are attempting to deal with injustice. Boy, that is so true. I mean, you can bring this down on a real personal level. You know who really does, people that do a lot of things that they shouldn't do are your kids, right? When you're raising your children. Put your toys up, don't do that, don't do this, don't do that, don't do this, you know. Well, those are injustices, so to speak, right? They're disobeying mom and dad. So you told them to do something, and you do it one more time, I'm going to spank you. You do it one more time, well, I'm telling you, one more time, And then what happens? Mom or dad get really angry. And what do? They really let the child have it. That's so when you get angry, you don't think. That's why a lot of children get abused, because I like what he said about, what happened to his wife. And he went to that meeting and he wasn't angry. It was just a matter of fact. He was thinking on his feet, right? So a mom and dad, when they're disciplining their kids, when you tell them, you do that one more time, and they do it one more time, what should a parent do? The parent should discipline them, right? If you tell them that if you do it one more time, you're going to get a spanking, and they do it one more time, you discipline them. Guess what? You're not angry. You don't have all those emotions welling up because they disobeyed you 100 times. You just do it because you told them that you were going to do it, and you disciplined them. So, where do you see examples of anger making problems worse in the world today? I mean, it's all over. Come on.
Domestic disputes, and then the person ends up getting shot and maybe killed.
Yeah, it happens all the time, doesn't it? We see it in the news. Everybody is angry. They're not. Portland, Oregon. Oh, I mean, just anger, 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 anger. And what does it accomplish? It doesn't accomplish anything. But have you ever, personally, does anybody have any personal experience that you would like to share? Where anger made problems worse.
I won't give you anything specific because it is personal. And
Okay.
involves my wife, who's not even in here. But we've been married for 30-some years, and in that time, I can tell you, and I'm sure we're not unique, there have been many times where there was anger over something that didn't need anger.
Mm-hmm.
There would be a misunderstanding or, one of us, and it goes both ways, towards me, towards her.
Right.
Both ways, a misunderstanding, and then an assumption would be made, and it's like, are you accusing, I feel I am a victim of injustice, or
Mhm.
she may feel she's a victim of injustice.
Right.
Because are you accusing me of something, that I didn't do? And then if anger plays into it,
Mm-hmm.
then it just goes back and forth, and everybody in here knows exactly how that works.
Yep.
It goes back and forth, and it gets worse, and it blows up. But if at least one of us will stop and let the anger go, and not and deal with it with a loving attitude.
Mhm.
And it's so much easier to see how the misunderstanding arose in the first place. You can see things from the other person's point of view, and it's just resolved so easily if the anger doesn't come into it.
Yep. Absolutely, yes.
I can relate like that to what I'm saying. And I notice about myself is like I react before I think.
Mm-hmm. Yep. A lot of people do. You have that knee-jerk reaction.
I think whatever affects you in the past sometimes like will go forward in my mind before I can think about
Mm-hmm.
like something gets me riled up and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
I really
It's almost like on our DNA, it's like we just, we don't think. Oftentimes what happens, what happens? We allow our emotions to control us, our actions, without thinking logically. And that's why I like what Brant said. He goes, I was thinking on my feet. Because anger clouds your reasoning ability, right? You get your emotions involved. So, there's a great deal of confusion in the church today about the concept of forgiveness. as many believe that forgiving someone means pretending that everything is okay. So what is a practical and biblical definition of what it means to actually extend forgiveness? I do want to say something that he didn't address. I think he kind of touched on it a little bit. And this is really clear cut. All this talk about forgiveness. I mean, we could take the next 10, 15 minutes and talk about forgiveness, you know. But they really did me wrong, you know, should I forgive them? How can I forgive somebody? But I just want to tell you that forgiveness is volitional. It's an act of the will. I mean, don't let that go in one ear and out the other. It's an act of the will, okay? It doesn't have to be prayed about. It doesn't have to be thought about. You don't have to consider it. You don't have to weigh all the different options of what was done to you. None of that plays a part. This is a fact. We are commanded to forgive. We're not asked to forgive. We are told to forgive. And so Jesus says, if you love me, you'll keep my commands, right? And one of his commands are we are to forgive one another. And how could we not forgive when we consider ourselves and what we've done to our Savior, and he has forgiven us? So we have been forgiven a lot. Emotions cannot play a part in whether or not you forgive. Now, you can be done wrong. There can be an injustice. There can be hurt feelings. There can be all kinds of things that well up inside of a person. But when it comes time to forgive, even if you're like, well, you don't know what they did, or you're not in my, it doesn't matter. I'm not being crass, okay? I'm not. It just doesn't matter. And when you divorce the emotions from it and look at it from a logical perspective based upon the Word of God, it's real easy. You do it. Right? We're to pray, are we not? You don't have to think about it. You know, you just do it. John.
I agree with what you're saying, but when it comes to forgiveness, a lot of times I think pride gets in the way.
Oh, I'm sure.
And you know, when that happens, they've done it to me, so I expect them to apologize to me first. You know?
Yeah. Well, what is pride? Is it not sin? So not only does pride get in the way, keep you from forgiving, now you got two sins. You got pride coming up, and then you're not forgiving. So you just have to, what I'm saying is we get so involved emotionally in this issue of forgiveness. And a perfect example is Charlie Kirk, you know, when he was assassinated. I am telling you, almost 99.9% of the people that I was around, Christians, you would not believe what was coming out of people's mouths. Boy, I hope they burn in hell. I hope they get caught. They need to shoot him. They need to do this. You know, those are just these are the things that well up inside of because an injustice had been done. Charlie Kirk was a great man, doing a lot of things for the kingdom of God. And this guy comes over here and kills him. And so anyway, now I'm not putting myself, you know, I mean, I'm not perfect. You guys know me. You know I'm not perfect. But I'm listening to this, and I'm thinking, no. You know, that's not right. It's not right. We don't do that. We don't have, that's not our job, right? Our job is to forgive. And then lo and behold, what did his wife do? His wife forgave. And there are people out there that probably still haven't forgiven him for what he's done. They think that he, you know, that all. Now that does not negate, okay, the full implementation of the law. It has nothing to do with that. That's justice. Justice can be meted. If that's the death penalty, that's fine, okay? That's just a fact. That's the law. No emotions. That's the way it is. Now, if she were to give her input and say that she would not desire for him to receive the death penalty, that'd be fine too. She probably would have some weight in what she says and how she would want that justice meted out. But we need to forgive. So so what is the biblical definition of forgiveness? Make up one.
Jesus said, forgive not 7 times, but 77.
70 times 7. Yep.
So just keep on.
Yeah.
And oftentimes people say, I can forgive, but I can't forget.
Well, and that's true. We don't have really the capacity to forget. And when God says that that we say that he forgets about our sins, well, forgetting is a deficiency. God has no deficiencies. So God doesn't forget, he chooses not to remember. Okay? There's a difference.
I think of course, you forgive somebody that they wronged you. Of course, you're going to remember, but I think not to keep bringing it up.
Exactly.
Dwelling on it.
Yeah. Because if you do that constantly, then you probably haven't forgiven them. Okay? Now, so everything that we hear, everything that we learn, everything that we read, everything that we've ever been taught, trust me, it's in our brain. Okay? It's in our memory. Now, it might be in a filing cabinet that's been rusted shut, okay, but it's there. So it's just, it's recalling things, okay? Recalling things. Sometimes we have difficulty recalling things. Other times we recall things when we shouldn't recall them. So when you forgive, it doesn't mean that everything is forgotten because something happened, right? But it does mean, Linda, like you said, you don't keep on bringing it up and bringing it up and bringing it up. Because if you do, then something's bothering you about that particular incident that you had to forgive somebody on. So it's bothering you. It's not been dealt with properly. Either, there's a misunderstanding of what forgiveness is. Yes, Betty?
The one thing that I learned is I felt I had justified or righteous anger is if you actually believe you can't forgive somebody, where is your mercy? God had mercy on you. So forgiveness and mercy go hand in hand. If you can't forget it, you've got to have the mercy to not let it grab and make roots and continue to grow.
That's good. I like that. And not everybody that offends you that you forgive doesn't mean you have to be buddies with them, right? Yes, Brian.
I think a big part of forgiveness is putting aside our desire for us to determine what their consequence should be, and our desire for us to ensure that that happens. It's not our decision to make.
Right.
We need to give up that desire to make that decision.
Yep. That's good. And I want to share something along that line, Brian. The Bible's very clear and is just full of verses talking about vengeance being God, belonging to God, right? And, we often hear the times, well, he will get his just deserts. He will get his comeuppance. God will do this. And so we know that we have that God will do that. Now that's God's business. It is so much of God's business that I don't even wish that upon anybody, even God doing it. Okay, that's how I am. How some people just can't wait till, you know what? He's gonna find out what it's gonna be like in hell. He's gonna judge him. Well, God will. My preference would be that the person gets saved. and, you know, he doesn't meet that. So we ought not to just relish the fact that, you know, they're gonna get their comeuppance. I wouldn't desire that for anybody, but that's God's business, it's not mine. So God can mete that out. That's beyond my pay grade. So I don't concern myself with it. All of us have been done wrong at some point in time, and you think, well, you know, they're gonna get their due. Well, God will do what he wants to do, you know? I guess what I'm saying is you just don't worry about it. You give it over to God. And that's kind of like what you're saying. You just give it over to God. He's in control, and he will do what's right. We don't know people's hearts, okay? We don't know motives.
We can sometimes, though, give it over to God and give up what we think is our right to make that decision, but then we can still say, you know what, I really want to be there when it happens.
I've heard,
That's not
I've,
forgiveness either.
no, I've heard people say that. So when you have that element in you, of course, and that wells up from that anger, right? You're still angry. You've got to deal with that anger. We have no right to be angry. We talk about righteous indignation. We are not righteous. God is. Jesus is. Not us. So just remember that forgiveness is an act of the will. And if I were to define it, a deliberate act of the will to let go. In fact, that's what forgiveness means in the Greek. You know what that means? It means to let go. You don't hold on to it. You let it go. It means to let go of wrongdoing, release resentment. It involves an intentional, this is important, intentional decision to extend grace, showing love and mercy, and trusting God to handle justice. You trust God to handle the justice. But it doesn't mean that you forget. It doesn't mean that it didn't happen, okay? It's not like, oh, you know, I'm told to forgive and forget. Well, you know, we don't. You know, it's hard to control what we remember and what we forget, right? I mean, sometimes we have memories like elephants. We just remember everything, but that doesn't mean we have to live there. We don't live there, okay? But we can, by an act of the will, forgive. Yes.
Steve, I don't know what everyone has lived through. I've never walked in your shoes, and you haven't walked in mine. And there are things that happen in our life that I firmly believe we have to forgive people, but I don't have to become best friends with
No.
them. And I think some people think that a Christian should be able to do that.
No.
Well, to me, that's not true because you've never walked in my life. You don't know what I've been through, and I don't know what you've been through.
Right.
But, you know, I know that forgiveness is the only way you can have any peace. I know that.
And you're right, we don't. And take away the part about you don't know what I've gone through, I haven't walked in your shoes, you haven't walked in mine. You can kind of even take that away. You don't have to use that as a prerequisite for not being chummy with somebody, okay? We can choose, and in our Sunday school class, we're talking about choosing friends, okay? It's very important that we choose the right friends. So we can love people.
You meet a lot of people in your life, but they're true friends.
Oh, there maybe a handful, you know. So just you can forgive somebody, and it doesn't mean that you have to hang out with them. It doesn't mean you have to be buddies with them. It doesn't mean that you hate them, but it doesn't mean that, you know, you want people that you're hanging around with that are cut of the same cloth that you are, okay? Because you want to build each other up, encourage each other. Yes, Becky. Yeah. Healthy boundaries. It's about setting healthy boundaries. Yeah. So, I mean, that's important. Some people seem to have a natural ability to stay calm in every situation. So who has been an example in your life of remaining cool and confident even in the most difficult situations? Yes. There you go. Calm, calm and collected. Yep. Yes. Your mom. Yeah. Perfect example. Your grandma?
humble lady, and she would some way tell you what you were doing wrong, and it was kind the way she did it. And, you know, she was just a godly woman.
Yeah.
I loved her dearly.
I think, usually we all know somebody that it's like, how do they do that? You know, like in all this chaos, how on earth are they being so calm? It's like nothing riles them up, and I mean, do you have anybody else want to share any examples or anybody that has been a calming influence in your life? Somebody that you look at and you think, wow, how do they go through that? With all that they've experienced or what they're going through. It does provide a calming influence, does it not, when you have somebody like that around you? Brian?
Earlier years on the job, I had a supervisor that I worked for, a sergeant that was, he never worked up about anything, and even, and it was very calming, because even when you're out in dealing with people that don't like you, and people that don't like what's going on, and very verbal about expressing their anger, he did get angry back, and it was calming, not just for those people we're dealing with, but for the rest of us,
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
because it's easy when people are, saying horrible things at you, to say horrible things back.
Mhm.
And when you have somebody leading you that doesn't react in a negative way, it's very calming for both sides.
Yeah. Yeah, and seemingly, it seems like they're few and far between, because people they do have that knee-jerk reaction where they just, well, you tore into me, so I'm gonna tear into you, and then you have all those emotions that just, everything heats up. But if you have that calming influence, it really does make a difference. Betty?
My husband is the perfect example of someone who's so mild-mannered and able to think and not react. I've seen him talk to people who are just losing it. And he can sit there and say, the fact of the matter is, and he'll say it to them very gently in a very long tone, and he quotes scripture. He does it all the time, whether the person is saved or not. He lets them know that whatever the situation that was causing the issue doesn't have to get out of hand, doesn't have to get nasty. Danny is very, very good peacekeeper.
Good, praise the Lord.
He is. I've never seen him lose his cool. He's gotten angry.
Well, you're his wife,
I don't have to push those buttons.
Yeah,
But even then, he doesn't go berserk or anything.
right.
He'll even use that on me, but back to the matter is,
But then when you do that, then you're confronted with the truth, and sometimes people don't like that either, and
and like you said, when you're around somebody like that a lot, I was the firstborn, I was the smallest one in my family, but nobody picked on my sisters. And they were both bigger than me, and if anybody picked on them, I would beat them up. I wasn't raised.
you're the protector.
Yeah, I'm just yeah, I guess.
Yeah.
So I'm like that in every aspect of my life. You don't mess with my family. You don't deliberately hurt those I love, or you're gonna get the wrath of Betty. Well, Danny has taught me another way. Not the wrath of Betty. Love and mercy.
There you go. Yep, yep. Good discussion. Yes, John?
Speaking of anger, Betty
let things cool off a little bit, yeah. You know, we're emotional beings, right? But anger is not a fruit of the Spirit. I mean, and it doesn't do anybody any good. So we just need to, and not to be so offendable, you know, we do get offended easily. I mean, in this day and age, sometimes you ever feel like you're around people and you got to walk on eggshells, you know? You got to be very careful what you say and what you do or whatever, and just let it go off your back. Like I said one time, there's a guy that his boss always would write him at work, and he would always tell me, you know, that he had a terrible day at work and things were going bad. Every time he'd go in, you know, his boss would push his buttons, right? Like you do with Danny. And I said, well, what you need to do is get rid of your buttons. If you get rid of your buttons, nobody can push them, right? So just get rid of your buttons. Don't be so easily offended. Yes?
And my dad, you know, you're talking about relationships and domestic violence, just like when my, you know, Elvin and Diane's, you know, I told you their grandson got murdered last week. It was over a relationship,
Yeah.
you know, and so you think, you know, my dad was, when I was growing up, or having a breakup with a boyfriend, he goes back, he said, just tip your hat and slowly walk by, because it isn't worth all.
It's not worth
You
it.
know what I mean? And
Oh,
I
yeah.
just, you know, I couldn't understand it then.
Yeah.
Right? But now that I think back on that, that's advice.
Yeah. And domestic violence, I mean, Thelma's brother-in-law, Archie McAllister, was a deputy sheriff for years and years and years and years. And Brian can probably testify to this. Not only did Archie tell me, but multiple police officers has told me that the most dangerous thing that they go to, that they hate going to, is a domestic violence call. It's almost always a no-win situation. You go in there and maybe the wife's getting abused. Now there's mandatory arrest, and it's been like that for years and years. But prior to that, there wasn't a mandatory arrest. But somebody now is going to go to jail. But you know, you go in there and it's just not a good situation. Is that correct, Brian? I mean, it's not a good thing to go to. They don't like that because you have the emotions. Just. Yeah. Well, good discussion. Anything else before we close? Because you know what? I'm going to get you guys out of here at 8 o'clock. What do you think about that? That's exciting, yeah. Well, if nothing else, I'm going to ask Randy if he wants to close us in prayer.